Teresa.
Okay, good. Hi, everybody coming in. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shelley Shanfield with the Ann Arbor Area League of Women Voters, and I'm welcoming you to Brews and Views. We'll give people a few minutes to get settled, resolve any technical issues, and grab a brew. We're all pretty familiar with Zoom by now, but guidance for the meeting is on screen. We want to thank our usual gracious hosts, Pointless Brewery and Theater and Holmes Brewery. Pointless Brewery has started curbside pickup of brews and merchandise on Saturdays at 12 to 5 p.m. And Holmes Brewery has recently reopened with a new ordering procedure to keep everyone safe. And they also continue to have curbside pickup. The URLs for these two great local brews are on screen, or will be on screen at the, oh no, I guess they're on screen right there. Sorry about that. Okay, so the tips for engagement are up there. The noise control, participants will be muted by the host. If your visibility, if your video camera is on, others can see everything you do. So keep in mind we are and also streaming on Facebook. So, you know, don't take off your shirt. And the chat, if you would like to submit questions, type them in all caps into the chat box. Scroll over the bottom of your screen to find the button and send them to the moderator. And please, again, support our usual sponsors. And please note that the League of Women Voters of the United States is a nonpartisan voter education organization encouraging informed, active participation in government. It is the League's position that voting is a fundamental citizen right that must be guaranteed. Tonight's presentation will not necessarily represent the League, but is supportive of community members, informing us about their work and various topics important to democracy. Okay, Teresa.
All right, terrific. Thank you, Shelley. I'm Teresa Reed, a member of the Brews and Views Committee. We're happy to have tonight Diana Ramey speaking with us on the increasingly urgent topic of protection of our voting rights. Attacks on voting rights have reached alarming levels leading up to November 2020 election. The first election we'll conduct during a pandemic. Efforts to discredit the absentee balloting, to reduce the number of drop boxes and polling places, and even to slow the mails have raised anxiety among many citizens that their votes will not count in this all-important election year. Diana Ramey is an attorney of counsel with the law firm Jaffe, Raitt, Hewer, and Weiss, PC, in the practice areas of business law, family law, and real property. A longtime member of the American Civil Liberties Union, Ms. Ramey is active in the ACLU's voter protection efforts. We're very happy to welcome Diana Ramey this evening. Diana?
Hi, thank you. Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. As you were just told, I'm a volunteer attorney with the ACLU's voter protection team. I've been in practice for 43 years. But I'm relatively involved in the 2016 election because of my concern about where the country was going. And after that election and its aftermath, I began to really think seriously about how fragile our democracy is.
Diana, you're muted. Nancy, can you unmute Diana?
I'm unmuted.
All right, good. You got involved in the 2016 election.
Yes. I was concerned about where the country was going. And as things have progressed, I think that was with good reason. After the 2016 election, when I started really thinking about how fragile our democracy is, what I started thinking about was that no one candidate or one issue really was going to make our democracy work unless two things happened. People have to vote and their votes have to count. The 2020 election is shaping up to be one of the most important elections in our lifetime. And I'm excited to share the work that the ACLU is being done here to secure full and fair access to the ballot ahead of the 2020 election. A couple statistics. We're expecting a record turnout at the August primary. A number of counties in Michigan actually doubled their voter turnout. Wayne, Oakland, Kent, Washtenaw, Kalamazoo, Livingston, a number of others. So there's a lot of interest in this election already, and they're definitely expecting a huge turnout in the November election. It's no surprise that voting rights have been front and center the past few months, particularly with all of the attacks on voter access and most recently the concerns about the mail-in voting. But the ACLU's voting rights journey started a long time ago, even before some of these current concerns came up. So can I have the first slide? Nancy, next slide. Thanks. Before 2018, Michigan, you'll see here, was one of the few states that did not allow any reason absentee ballots and had a lot of restrictions on when you could register to vote. It was one of a handful of states that had those kinds of restrictions. But then the 2018 election, next slide, please. Then the 2018 election was a turning point for voting rights in Michigan with the passage of two important ballot proposals. Proposal 2, which was propounded by Voters Not Politicians, created an independent redistricting commission to redraw the heavily gerrymandered voting district boundaries. And that proposal passed. It survived numerous court challenges, and a commission has now been established to get to work on redrawing those districts. But their work won't really show results until the 2022 election. Proposal 3, the Promote the Vote initiative, was one of the things that ACLU played a key role in getting passed. And this is a constitutional amendment to ensure that our voting rights are actually enshrined in the state's constitution, where hopefully they'll be protected from partisan attack. Proposal 3, as you see on the screen, ensures the right to vote a secret ballot, to ensure military service members and overseas voters get their ballots in time for their votes to count, provides voters with the option to vote straight party. It causes the Secretary of State to automatically register citizens to vote if they apply for a driver's license or a state ID, unless they specifically opt out. It allows citizens to register to vote at any time with proof of residency, and that's huge. And it provides all registered voters access to an absentee ballot for any reason or no reason at all. And once again, that's a really big deal. It also ensures the accuracy and integrity of elections by auditing election results. So that's proposal 3. We realized pretty soon after the amendment, after this was passed, that rule changes alone were not going to secure ballot access. And at the ACLU and others working for the same purposes had to make sure that this new law was actually going to be implemented. So in early 2020, the ACLU launched its election protection effort. That is something that focuses on 2 paths for securing ballot access. One path is making sure election officials have the resources they need to implement the changes in the law. And the other path is to make sure that voters have the information they need to take full advantage of their voting rights. COVID-19 has made it even more crucial that we equip voters with the tools they need to cast their ballots and to make sure the election officials have what they need to make their elections run smoothly. Now, on the election official slide, we've been working closely with clerks to address any barriers that they are facing to secure access to the ballot. We've been holding individual meetings with clerks, surveying their needs, and then building out plans to address those concerns. And those range from, do they have enough drop boxes? do they have enough personal protection equipment in their poll places, and a whole range of other issues. One big need that we're seeing across the board is poll workers, and we'll talk more about that later. Now, on the voter side, we're making sure that voters know they have the right to vote by absentee ballot without any reason. You can leave the slides there for a moment, and I'll just tell you when we need to change. This is fine where it is. We want to make sure voters are educated on how they can request a ballot, and we want to make sure voters know how and when they need to return their ballot in time for it to be counted. So as we look ahead to the 2020 election, we're committed to continuing the work that we've already done, but we're trying to expand on it too, and things like this Brews and Views are part of that effort. It's impossible for us to contact all voters or potential voters. So the ACLU has determined to focus its efforts specifically on a group of voters that they're calling the rising American electorate. And these are the voters who are most at risk of being disenfranchised, voters who historically have voted in lower numbers than other groups. Typically, those include new voters, young voters, people of color, and women, particularly single women. And I don't know why that is, but it's an interesting statistic. I'm told that they are actually underrepresented, and it's a group that we need to reach. Now, many factors determine why these voters are at risk for disenfranchisement, but one of the big ones is geography. Young people and new voters are often on college campuses, and the campuses have often seen long lines at their voting booths. This year, we also saw long lines for voters to register to vote on election day. Urban areas struggle with ensuring access to the ballot. Their communities are often understaffed, and as a result, they have to consolidate their voting places. And once again, they've seen long lines and some confusion in some of the polling places as a result of new polling workers and poor training. But a lot of that, again, is being addressed. We're hopeful that by refining our focus this way, we'll have a greater impact on voters who aren't often talked to. The voters who are so often the focus of candidate campaigns are either likely voters or voters who are likely to vote for a particular party. And that's valuable, but what we're trying to do really is focus on the voters who are not being talked to, the ones who have the same rights as everyone else, but may not know it. And we want to do our part to make sure that they're turning out to vote in 2020. So where does that leave us? We're 50 days out from Election Day, and we're laser focused on ensuring that voters know their voting rights. So if you go back one slide, michiganvoting.org is the ACLU website that's a one-stop shop for voting rights information. And it's the first place we're directing voters to look for more information. So if you have questions, that's really the first place I would suggest you go. I'm going to also suggest that the Michigan Voter Information Center, and we don't yet have a slide up for this, but if you want to write it down, that is mi.gov/vote. And that is the Michigan Voter Information Center. It's, I think, a state run service, and it's also very informative. What we want to do is educate voters on a few key rights. Okay, next slide. First one is voter registration. The next is voting by mail or drop box. And the third is voting early and in person. So let's talk about voter registration. Next slide. Michigan voters can register to vote at any time. This is new, and it's going to make things a lot easier, and we're hoping it'll bring out a lot more voters who would not have been able to vote in the past. We're recommending that voters register as soon as possible. In this effort, the key date is October 20th, which is 15 days before the election. Before October 20th, you can register in a whole host of ways, as you see on the slide. You can register online at mi.gov/voter registration. You can register by mail. You can register in person at the Secretary of State, city, township, or the county clerk's office, or a voter registration drive. And one thing that's not on this slide is you can also register at any state agency that provides public assistance or services to people with disabilities. Now, there's a couple wrinkles here. If you want to register online, you have to have a Michigan driver's license or state issued ID. That's not a requirement overall for voter registration, but for the online registration, that is a requirement. If you vote by any of these other methods, the forms ask for your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. But you'll also see in fine print that there's a box to check that says that you don't have these. And in general, you don't need any of that ID in order to register to vote by mail or in person or in a voter registration drive. There's one exception to that, which is that a first-time voter needs federal ID or proof of registration if they're voting by mail or through a voter registration drive. I'm going to hold up, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but there's a kind of a spreadsheet that we were given as to what a kind of a flow chart of the different kinds of ID that might be required or asked for. It sounds very complicated, but really what it comes down to is most kinds of registration do not require ID. If you don't have the ID, you will have to sign an affidavit saying that you are who you are and where you live, but you don't necessarily need the ID. As I say, there are a couple of these types of registrations that do have exceptions for that. Then, starting October 20th, it's a different story. There, you can only register to vote in person at the clerk's office, and you will be asked for proof of residency. So, next slide, please. What is proof of residency? That can be a Michigan driver's license or state ID card. It can be any other state's current driver's license or state ID. It can be a high school or college ID, a utility bill, a bank statement, a paycheck, a government check, basically anything that shows your name and address, and then that'll be good enough for that purpose. You can use electronic copies. So if you have it on your phone, that's going to be good enough. So how do you know if you're registered to vote? This is a question that comes up at the voter hotline frequently. Go to Michigan, the mi.gov/vote, and follow the directions there. There'll be a link to Am I Registered to Vote, and you'll be able to actually see whether you're registered and be able to confirm what your registration address is. So whether it's before or after October 20th, register to vote, encourage people to register to vote, and register as soon as possible. Once you're registered, that opens up the possibility to exercise other new vote rights, especially if you're doing it before October 20th. You can vote by absentee ballot for any reason, and you have the right to vote early and in person at the clerk's office. So next slide. Absentee voting. Next slide. When in Michigan, starting 75 days before the election, you can request an absentee ballot. And starting 40 days before the election, which is September 24th, you can actually vote an absentee ballot. So that's when you can walk in, and I'll tell you more about this, but you can walk into a clerk's office and apply for and actually vote anytime starting September 24th. The weekend before the election, the clerk's office must be open 8 hours during the previous weekend, and a number of the clerks have committed to being open even before that. Many of the clerks have also opened satellite offices. So that will be shown on the voting websites that I've told you about. Those addresses will be posted and should be kept up to date on those sites. What that means is you don't necessarily have to go just to the one clerk's office who has traditionally handled voting. Many of them will have satellite offices. And I know that Detroit is opening up offices in the double digits. They're really making an effort to make their offices accessible. So the day before Election Day, you can register and vote at the clerk's office until 4 p.m. And on Election Day, if you want to register to vote or update your address, you can do that at any time up until the polls close, but you're going to have to go to the polling place to actually cast your vote. So the main point to remember about your absentee ballot is that it must be received by your local clerk by 8 p.m. on election day. Not postmarked, not tried to deliver, it's got to actually be received on election day. There has been some litigation challenging that. There were some lawsuits attempting to change the rule to have it be a postmark date as opposed to the receipt. Right now, those have all lost and the Supreme Court has declined to rehear them. So I think right now that's the final word as far as we know. So the thing to remember here is you've got several steps to complete before you can actually have your absentee ballot counted. So start the process early. You've got to request your ballot. When your ballot is received, you've got to fill it out. You have to sign it and sign the envelope that it comes in. And then you have to return it to the clerk, all completed by 8 p.m. on election day. Now, for the August primary, Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, mailed all voters an application for absentee ballots. And I'm not sure, maybe someone here can answer this. I'm not sure if they're sending them out again. I know that some clerks in some areas are sending out applications to everybody, but I don't know if that's happening statewide. The application has a box to check where you can opt to join what they call the permanent absentee voter list, meaning that you intend to vote absentee not just at the upcoming election, but at all future elections. And that's a little misleading because all it does is guarantee that an application for an absentee ballot will be sent. It does not actually get your ballot. So you can't get an absentee ballot unless you apply for it. And you can apply for it, as I say, anytime now. Those are available. But you have to fill out the application. So how do you request an absentee ballot? Next slide, please. Oh, I'll wait for that. To request an absentee ballot, you can apply for it online at mi.gov/vote. Or you can fill out the written application and mail or deliver it to your clerk. It's important to note that voters will just receive, again, I just want to emphasize this, the voters that get the mailings automatically, if they do, are only getting applications to have an absentee ballot, not the actual ballot. And because there's some turnaround, you've got to apply for the ballot and then get that application into the clerk in time for them to get you your ballot. All of that takes time. So we're recommending that if you submit your ballot application by about now, and if you haven't done it by now, you should walk it in instead of mailing it, just to be sure. Now, how do you vote absentee? Next slide, please. We need to go back a bit. There are a number of ways to vote absentee. That's okay, you can just leave it there. You can vote absentee by mail. By statute, the clerks can start mailing out ballots starting September 24th. That's 40 days before the election. And when you receive the ballot, you fill it out, you place it in the envelope that they provide, and there's a place to sign it as well as signing on the outside of the envelope. And that's very important. The ballot will be rejected if you have not signed on the outside of the envelope. You deliver it to your local clerk, and you can do that either by mail, although we would recommend don't do that any later than October 19th because of concerns over mailing delays. Or the better approach would be to actually drop off your ballot with the clerk at their address or in one of their drop boxes or at one of their satellite offices. And certainly after October 19th or so, that would be the best thing to do, is actually personally deliver it. Many clerks have drop boxes at their own offices, so you don't have to go inside. Many of them have drop box locations elsewhere. You can find your clerk on the mi.gov/vote website. That's the Michigan Voter Information Center. There'll be a link to Where is My Clerk, and you'll give your address and they'll tell you who your clerk is. And probably that will also have the Dropbox locations. If you can't find it through the websites, and the other voter information website I gave you will also have the clerk information. But if you can't find it for any reason or you need help, there is a hotline, 1-866 Our Vote. That's OURVOTE. And that's the ACLU Voter Protection Hotline. And there, if you call them up, they'll tell you whether you're registered to vote. They'll help you find your clerk. They'll have the Dropbox locations for you. They'll have all that information available. But once again, remember that the ballots actually have to be received by 8 o'clock on election day. Now, what I think is the best way to vote, and that's what this slide is voting early in person. I highly recommend it because you can avoid crowds at the polls. You don't have to worry about mail delays. You're going to know for sure that your ballot actually made it where it was supposed to be in time, and then you can forget about it. And you can do it starting September 24th or later. So we're coming up on the time when you can go and take care of it and then just be done with it and not worry anymore. At the clerk's office, it's sort of like a truncated absentee voter methodology. You go in, you apply for and you receive the absentee ballot right then and there. You fill it out and you return it to the clerk, and then you walk out of there and you voted. You can do that until the day before the election at 4 p.m. So that's, if you've got any question about your ballot making it where it's supposed to, that's a really good way to do it if you're uncomfortable actually voting in person at the polls. Next slide. The other way to vote, if you don't vote in person at the clerk's office before election day, and if you haven't mailed or delivered your ballot otherwise, is voting in person at your polling place. Election day is November 3rd. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Anybody who is in line at 8 p.m. has the right to vote. So even if there's a long line, once you're in line, you're guaranteed to be able to get in. But there is risk in many places of short staffing, and there are many people have a concern about COVID-19, and particularly because of that concern, there are fewer poll workers because many times older people have been serving as poll workers, and in particular, the people in those high-risk categories have been concerned about working this election cycle. So there's possibility that there could be some crowds and some confusion at the polling places. And the best way to avoid that is to vote early, either by mail or in person, and not worry about it. And once again, let me emphasize that they do need poll workers, and I'll tell you how to sign up if you're interested later. So if you want to find your polling place, mi.gov/vote or michiganvoting.org, those two websites will both tell you where your polling place is. Where do you tell other voters for information, or where do you go for information beyond what we talked about here? One of the ways to do it is the Know Your Rights brochure for the ACLU. Next slide, please. MichiganVoting.org has a lot of this information, and they have a whole Know Your Rights guide that has a lot of frequently asked questions, and it's really kind of the first place to go if you have a question and you want to try and look it up and you don't want to just call the hotline to ask. This is, again, your one-stop shop for all things voting rights. And if anyone asks you a question about any voting matters, if you don't know the answer, look it up here or direct them to this website. Next slide, please. I'm just going to toss this in because that's a little known fact, and I think it's interesting, and I'd like more people to know. You are not eligible to vote if you are currently serving a sentence and are incarcerated. But there are many people who are incarcerated who are not there because they're serving a sentence. They may be there because they're awaiting trial. or they've just been arrested and are awaiting arraignment. And there are people who are out on parole or probation. All of those people do have the right to vote. So it's only if you're actually actively serving a sentence that you are barred from the right to vote. And that's something that we need to make sure we get the word out. If you do have any contacts in any of the county jails and you have any way to do some volunteer work and get in touch with people within the jail, try and get absentee ballots to people who are incarcerated, that would be a good thing to do. Next slide, please. One of the things we're encouraging people to do, if you have time and the energy to do so, is to be a poll worker. You can sign up at this michiganvoting.org Be a Poll Worker site. And you can also sign up on the Secretary of State's site. It's paid work. They provide training. You can be a poll worker from age 16 or up. I'm told that some of the clerks around the state are asking people to be 18 or up. The law says 16 or up is what it is, although is what's permitted. But if you have a local clerk who is not comfortable with that, we're not trying to challenge that at this moment. You just have to kind of go with it. But sign up to be a poll worker, ask your friends to sign up to be a poll worker. That's the thing that's going to really help the election go as smoothly as possible. Next slide, please. There's an election protection hotline, which is already up and running. You can see here in English, it's 866-OUR-VOTE. And there are people around the country, but there's a Michigan contingent who is taking calls. And there are other numbers that you can call for other languages. And you can see that there's a number of different languages where we're able to answer questions. And these are questions of any kind, things like what kind of ID do you need? Where do you vote? Are you registered? How do you get an absentee ballot? A full range of issues. I had a lady call me who wanted to report that the polling place she had taken her aged mother to was not handicap accessible, and that she and her mother finally found an elevator and got down and then got stuck in the elevator for 25 minutes. So you hear all kinds of voting horror stories, but that's the place to go if you've got a question starting right now. It doesn't have to be something that happens on election day. We're asking especially that voters report issues at all stages of the voting process. So if you run into some problem with any kind of voter suppression or difficulty in registering or casting your ballot, call the hotline and let us know, and we will then perhaps try and dispatch people to talk to clerks or do whatever's necessary to address the problem. Next slide. So here's the Michigan Voter Information Center. This is the other website that you ought to know about. Again, this is where you can check your voter registration. You can confirm that you're registered at your current address. You can find out when the next election is in your community, find your polling location, view a sample ballot, get the location, phone number, and hours for your clerk, including satellite offices. And interestingly, you can track the status of your absentee ballot. So they will tell you whether your ballot's been received and whether it's been issued and whether it's been received. There is also another website, and gee, I don't have that handy. There is another one that will send you actual email alerts. And if during the question and answer session, if I can find that, I will. Otherwise, maybe I'll just post it on the Facebook page, because that's a site that will not only track your absentee ballot, but will send you an email or a text telling you when it's been received. So next slide. What we're asking you to do here is just take action. You can, next slide, please. There's a lot of things that volunteers can do as we approach the election. We are organizing calls to voters, texts to voters, and postcard writing campaigns for voters. And in addition to serving as a poll worker, these are all things that take a lot of people power. And if you're interested, you can contact the ACLU in order to sign up for that. I will put on the Facebook page the email of the person at the ACLU to contact for that. I will just tell you now, if you want to write it down, it's Jayoub, Jayoub at aclu.mich. But there's many people in the voter protection group who can steer you to that. And the voter protection hotline can also steer you to the right place for that. So next slide. If you've got questions, let us know. You can actually send them to questions@michiganvoting.org. We'll try and handle some of them here. Maybe through the Facebook page, we can field a few more. And we'll see if we can try and make sure that people are educated as to what their voting rights are. I hope I've provided you with some useful information so you can exercise your voting franchise. Just remember that it has never been easier to vote in Michigan than this year. You just have to get out and do it, and there are many ways to do it. Please get out there, vote early, encourage other people to do the same. And if you do, you'll help preserve and strengthen our democracy. Thank you. I think Teresa, I think you're muted.
There we go.
Oh, you're still muted.
Uh-oh, Teresa, you're unmuted. Uh-oh. 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 Oh, it's down to 20 participants. I could unmute at this point. I could leave at this point. Sorry.
Teresa, unmute.
Teresa, you need to unmute.
Got it. Okay, leave me
There you
on.
are.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Edie. And thank you, Diana. So I want to is everybody unmuted? Nancy, would you please let everybody unmute themselves? If possible. I want to be able to talk with Rena Bash. Nancy, can you unmute people?
Yeah, I'm trying to
Okay.
figure out if I can do that all at once.
We're going to try for that. I just want to say that Rena Bash is on the phone, and Rena is the chair of the Brews and Views Committee and is also the clerk for Ann Arbor Township. So she is an expert, big time, in voting and handling elections, and she did want to comment that the going into your clerk's office to vote is more complicated than just going in during office hours at many clerk's offices. So if you can speak, Rena, that'd be great.
I think she's still, I don't see how she can unmute herself. I've been asking her to.
Came in on the phone.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So she's.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Gotcha, Rena. Great.
Yeah. On the telephone, just so everybody knows, you have to *6
Oh,
to unmute yourself.
that's great to
And
know.
I don't-
Get it.
Yeah. I don't believe the host has the power either. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak up, because I really, you all know that I am a dedicated voting rights activist, but as a clerk, I have to tell you, it is operationally problematic, super challenging, and downright awful when people think that they can just stroll in anytime and, quote, vote early, because Michigan does not have early voting. What we have is absentee voting. And And issuing and managing the process of absentee ballots is a lot more work than when people come and vote in person. And so now you've created, if you're telling people to come to the clerk's office whenever and apply and get their ballot and sit there and vote it and give it right back, you have now really doubled the work. So you have made the clerk stop whatever they're doing, issue your ballot, which takes a long time, and then you're going to vote it absentee and sign it and hand it back to them. It's still not counted until election day. And guess what? Now you've made more work because on election day, processing the absentee ballots is more work than the poll workers processing the voters that come to vote in person. So if you have the ability to come in person, why wouldn't you just come on election day when there's a whole army of poll workers, of which I hope some of you are going to be there to assist you, as opposed to these, I'll just say, smaller jurisdictions where there's one clerk and one deputy clerk, and we have, an expletive ton of stuff to do, and then we're supposed to drop everything and issue an absentee ballot for somebody that's standing at our door. So that's my first point, is that you're actually making more work, even though you're exercising your right. And my second point is with COVID safety, a lot of us in smaller jurisdictions,
Could go.
I don't have the space for people. So our building is still actually closed to the public, and we're utilizing a Dropbox system on the outside. So yes, from October 19th through November 3rd, we will be open to the public. And I already don't know how I'm going to manage that with handicapped access and COVID safety, because I don't have a place to put people 6 feet apart to wait in line to come to the window. And then there's no place for them to actually turn around without going right past the line or going downstairs. Okay, I'll stop elaborating on it, but really in all of us smaller jurisdictions, it is really difficult to manage in-person absentee voting, and in this COVID safety world, it's downright dangerous. So I really don't like to hear the ACLU telling people just show up and exercise your right to vote early, because we don't actually have the right to, quote, vote early in Michigan. We have the right to vote absentee. So I'll stop ranting now, but I will happily answer questions and clarify.
That's very informative, and it's really helpful to hear, from in the trenches, how that works. I'll certainly carry this back to the
Thank
voter
you.
and we'll duly note it. So thank you for that information.
Yeah, that's really, really important to know. And I was under the wrong impression as well. And I don't think it was the ACLU that told me. I thought that we could go at any time that the clerk is open and vote in person.
Well, you can. It is your right. But it is making more work, and it's going to make the election more challenging because, like I said, processing those absentee ballots, whether it's the clerk issuing it or the AV count board, the absentee voter count board, processing those, it takes more work and more people. And so it'll be longer on election day, and it's longer for the person actually, waiting for the clerk to go drop what she's doing and issue the ballot.
Okay.
The other issue that's come up is this September 24th date. And I'm having a lot of voters call about this because they've already submitted their application and they're getting communications from voting rights organizations that say after September 24th, they can come in. Well, their application, I already have 2,000 some applications in a neat pile waiting for the ballot to arrive. And then we're going to issue them. If somebody shows up at my door, how do I figure that out? Like they've already applied. Their ballot is already in the process of being mailed to them. It's somewhere in those different steps. And now they showed up in person, and you see what I'm saying? Like, how do we manage that? Do I say, okay, give me a minute, I'll paw through the 2,000 applications and find yours, and stop everything that we're trying to do to get them all into the mail and hand it to you in person. Like, it's just not going to work. So for the people that haven't yet applied, that's different. They can come if they must in person. But for the people that have already applied, we really have to get the message out. Please just wait. The mail isn't that bad.
Okay, yeah. So,
A question for you, Rena. People who have checked the box in their last application for an absentee ballot to be on the permanent absentee voter list, will their ballots now be, or their applications be mailed to them automatically now without them doing anything further?
Yes. So I think you're asking two different questions. So the first question is about the dual applications that were sent out by the Secretary of State and by all the local clerks back in June, right? And
Right.
the person could request both the August and the November. And if they did that, they are done. They have already applied. If they check the box to be on the permanent absentee application list for the future, then in the future, they will automatically get the application mailed to them. If they only checked the August box and they checked the permanent AV, they would have somebody would have already mailed them an application. If they checked the August and the November and the permanent, if they checked all three boxes, nobody's going to mail them another application. Their application is already on file. But in the future, they'll get more. They'll get the applications in advance of each election.
And are those people?
Does that make sense?
Yes, and are those people then people that you're describing as being in the stack that you've got all ready to mail out the ballots that would be
Right.
if they came in person?
Right. So all those
Okay.
people have, their application is literally already in the stack. And so they do not need to come in and fill out a new application. And if they come in and try to request the ballot in person, it's yet another operationally time-consuming task where we have to paw through all those things and find it and then issue the ballot, right? Because when you issue the ballot, you have to check you're going to check the signature on the application against the voter registration and then move forward with getting them the right ballot, right? So you see what I'm saying?
so it's important for people to know if they don't remember, if they did check the right boxes that they needed to check, that they can find that out. They can find out if they're on the permanent absent voter list at the Michigan Voter Information Center.
Yes, they can even,
MI.gov/vote.
right.
Right.
Correct. And they can find out if they don't remember if they've already asked for a November
Right.
ballot. That information it also shows if they've requested the application. It shows if they've requested an application. It shows if we've received the application. It shows if we've mailed the ballot. It shows if we've received the ballot.
Right.
So all those steps in the process. And if by some chance we rejected the ballot because it didn't have a signature, that would also show. So a person could just double check everything themselves at mi.gov/vote.
So that's super important. So Rena, from a harried clerk's perspective in the age of COVID, what you want people to do, what's the best way to help you do your job and have a clean election?
At this point, come vote in person. Honestly,
Really?
we're all going to the grocery store. We're all going to the bank. We're all going shopping. But prior to the August election, the Secretary of State and Washtenaw County provided us with so much gear and PPE. I mean, we have plexiglass shields just like at every public location. The workers are wearing masks. The workers have face shields. There's extra masks if a voter shows up without one. We have single-use pens. We have hand sanitizer. We have gloves. You can scan your own license. Most of the chairs set up the electronic poll book in such a way that the voter never even has to hand their license to a poll worker. They just swipe it themselves. Or if they don't want to swipe it, they can hold it up to the plexiglass shield and the poll worker can type in their information. So, you know, we can set up voting stations. I literally moved my polling places to a new facility in order to be able to set up voting stations 6 feet apart. So I personally feel like if anybody is feeling nervous about the post office, the best thing they can do is show up and vote in person. If they have any concerns about their health, they should vote absentee. But, you know, we already got more than 50% of the population planning to vote absentee.
Okay. All right. So if you're not already on the absentee ballot list, then vote in person is what you're suggesting.
That's just Rita's 2 cents. But
Well,
I would
yeah.
never tell somebody if they feel in any way uncomfortable, they should vote absentee. And again, do it nice and early.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with the recommendations to get those things in the mail as early as possible or to drop them off in the drop boxes. You know, the Secretary of State is paying for return postage for the first time ever. So it's a little awkward now that we're telling everybody to please come to the drop box when, by the way, I'm going to give you a prepaid envelope to return your ballot in. So
Yeah.
whose money do you want to waste right now?
Yeah, but again, the goal here is to make sure that every possible base is covered, and having that prepaid postage is helpful for that.
I think it's awesome, and it's really important for people that don't have transportation to be able to mail their ballot back.
Right.
So I personally think it's awesome. But honestly, if people feel concerned, they want to make sure their vote is counted, show up at the polls, vote your ballot, and you put it in the tabulator yourself, guess what? You know it's counted. You're not relying on the post office. You're not relying on anybody else.
Right. Okay, great. We have a question in chat from Rita. In 2018, there was an issue with same-day new voter registration taking place at clerks' offices by new voters thinking they could go to any office rather than to go to the office associated with their address. Can you speak to that, Diana or Rena?
Yeah, I don't know what problems were people encountered. I mean, the rule is you have a clerk who is assigned to your registered address or the address at which you want to register, and that's where you have to go. Certainly other clerks can't register you. That part is true. I don't know what the problems were beyond that.
I think there were a lot of problems in all the areas. You have an Ann Arbor mailing address, but you live in Scioto Township or Pittsfield Township or Northfield Township or Ann Arbor Township, and so there's a challenge for voters who are brand new, who don't really realize where they live. Maybe they don't pay taxes, right? They're a renter or something, and so they just have no way unless they look it up. So that's why we really push mi.gov/vote. But I will say that as a fact, on election day, we had people, being in one of those municipalities that also shares a name, right? Ann Arbor City, Ann Arbor Township, Plymouth Township, Plymouth City, City of Plymouth. There's a whole bunch of us across across Michigan, and all of us face that challenge where the voter is waiting in line, and they get to the front of the line and they discover they're not actually in the right place.
Yeah.
But I don't know, other than voter education ahead of election day and trying to get people not to do that last day registration.
Right. That's a last resort, really.
Right. And then they've made the mistake and now they're driving around and they're mad at the system. Well, yeah, maybe you should have thought about this last week.
Yeah, right. Okay, so we have, Diana, do you want to address or pose the questions that were submitted ahead of time?
I didn't the questions were just very, in a very general sense. I don't know that I have them here. They
Okay,
came in by email.
That's okay, I have them. So signature matching.
Right, I'm not sure what the question was about signature matching, but Rena, if she's still in the line, might be able to tell us something about that. The clerk does go through a process of making sure that the signature on the outside of an absentee ballot and on the ballot matches the signature on the registration. And the presumption is that it does match under the law. That is, we have to assume that it matches unless there's a good reason to suspect that it doesn't. If there's a very huge discrepancy, if there's a minor discrepancy, like if somebody it's registered some years ago and now their handwriting is shakier than it was, those are kinds of things that are typically supposed to not cause a problem. If a clerk finds that the signature doesn't match for some reason, my understanding is the Secretary of State's guidance is that they should contact the voter and let them know and give them an opportunity to either verify their signature or update their signature. But that is not a legal requirement, I don't believe. And I don't know how much the clerks are going to be doing that when they're deluged with absentee votes. I know in Michigan in the primary, there were some 6,000 plus votes that were absentee votes that were rejected for signature problems. I'm sorry, no, that was for arriving too late, but there were several thousand that were rejected for signature problems. So it is a potential problem. Once again, that's a problem you can get around if you vote actually in person at the polling place. But for people who are not comfortable doing that and do have to vote by absentee ballot, then there is a signature matching process. And Rena, are you there?
I am. I was muted. So yes, so the signature matching is it's as you described, but so we receive an application, we match the signature on the application to the voter registration. And you're right, there's a lot, clerks all grant a lot of leeway, wiggle room. Young people tend to print, autistic people tend to print, older people tend to have their signature changes over time. The voter registration signature is often the digitized signature from the driver's license. And as you all know, it's a tiny little box that you're signing with an electronic pen. So there's a little leeway given, but I will tell you, it is very obvious when somebody signs somebody else's, and what it usually is are parents signing for their kids. And what we usually do is, and I know that all clerks really do go above and beyond to try to get the correct signature, because, the other thing that happens is people believe that they have power of attorney for their spouse, or their spouse has injured their hand or had a stroke or something. And so it's either spouses or parents. And we just email, if we have contact information, we'll scan the signature that we have on file with the document that they had just submitted. And we'll say, hey, did someone else inadvertently sign Johnny Jr.'s application, because these signatures don't match? And then we just remind them the voter must sign their own documents. And 9 times out of 10, you know what, it doesn't even happen 10 times. I would say we get maybe 4 or 5 of those situations. And then the same thing with the ballot. If a ballot comes back, you now have 3 signatures that you're looking at. You're looking at the voter reg, the application, and the ballot. And if the application and the ballot are very close, but the voter registration was, 15 years ago, the clerks all accept it. I know the clerks all really make an effort to reach out. If there's no email or phone number, we will put it in the mail back to the person with a little sticky note, like, hey, here's a new envelope, that kind of thing. So I just know from personal experience that all the clerks really try to get the right signature. And it's only when it's a blank or it's just clearly doesn't match that those things get rejected. And again, I would say, in my experience, I've been a clerk since 2004, and we've only had a very few number of instances where we never resolved what the situation was. Most of the time, people are like, oh, I thought I had power of attorney.
So Rena, how do you though account for the horror stories of all of the millions of, millions, wasn't it, of absentee ballots?
There aren't millions. I mean, if you look at the numbers, that 600,000 number were ballots that arrived late. If you, even if it was a few thousand ballots that didn't have signatures that matched, most of those were probably blank, because people constantly forget. Doesn't matter how clear. And so most of those are forget. I think I've only rejected maybe 1 or 2 ballots ever because the signature was just so wrong. But I mean, I even had a poll worker that she's like, oh yeah, I didn't really pay attention when I signed. You know, young people don't realize, like, so you hopefully they've done it early enough that you have time to correct it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But if you look at, you know, we had, what was it? It was 2 million. I can't remember how many AV ballots we had in the primary. If you look at the percentage, it's very, very low of how many ballots are actually rejected for signature issues.
Okay. And the other issues is primarily late arrivals.
Yeah, that's the biggest reason for ballots being rejected, is they come back too late.
Okay. All right. Another question from that came in earlier was about observers. Who gets to be an observer? And do there have to be an equal number of observers identified for each party? How do observers work? And either Diana or Rena?
Rena, you may know more about this than I do. I've not got any experience other than having read the law about observers. But
Diana, I keep thinking that I should yield to the lawyer.
You guys, between you two,
yes.
we have really great expertise. I'm so happy.
You got it covered. So with the people with so there's poll watchers and there's poll challengers. Poll watchers are just people that can self-declare, and they just sit in the public area watching. They don't actually have any rights to touch anything. They can't challenge voters. They can't talk to voters. They can't talk to the staff, the election inspectors. They're just watching and perhaps reporting to, an ACLU hotline if they see something. Poll challengers are something different. Those are appointed by either political parties or nonprofit organizations such as the NAACP or the ACLU, Republican Party, Democratic Party, and challengers have rights that, again, us clerks and election workers just cringe. So they can stand there right behind, they can hover, stand there right behind everybody, and they are there to, quote, challenge voters. To me, they are harassers. But in some places, people might think of them as protecting voters' rights. But what they can do is they can, for no reason, they can just challenge a voter and say, I don't believe she has a legitimate right to vote. And then the poll workers, who are called election inspectors, have to actually issue a challenged ballot. And so it's a process by which of course takes a lot longer. They have to, have the person take an oath. Then they have to issue a ballot, and they have to write the number on the ballot stub on the back of the ballot, and then cover it with white tape. And then the person votes, and then, the stub is removed before they feed their ballot into the tabulator. But now, if that challenge turns out to be true, the number of that person's ballot is recorded in white tape or covered up recorded and then concealed in the back of the ballot. And so let's say the challenger says, this person's not a citizen. And the person says, hell yeah, I am, I get to vote. And so, yes, they get to vote, but if it's demonstrated later that they were not a citizen, their ballot would be pulled from the stack because the number has been recorded on the back. And so political parties use this to harass people, in my personal opinion, and challenge those that they think don't look like citizens, right?
Yeah.
So the flip side of that, and I've had my friends from the ACLU argue with me that challengers serve a really important role when election inspectors don't know what the heck they're doing. So sometimes in the past, election inspectors would turn people away who had a legitimate right to vote. For example, they had a legitimate right to get a provisional ballot, or they, something was funny with anyway, there are cases where poll workers are not trained properly and they are turning people away. And in those cases, challengers have stepped in and said, hey, that's not right. This person, either has the right, look at this person's, just because the license says CJ instead of Charles John, they're still on the voter list, or this person should be issued a provisional ballot because they have a receipt. There's situations where poll workers were disenfranchising people. And so in that case, challengers are trying to help the process. So that's
what you're saying in those cases is that the challengers can intercede on behalf of the voter,
yes.
not challenge the voter, but actually advocate for the voter.
Yes, correct. So challengers can do that. Challengers, again, though, they have to be appointed. They have to wear credentials. They have a lot of rights. They can look at all the materials. I don't believe they can touch the poll book, but they can ask to see things. And so they can kind of gum things up a little bit. I've only had a challenger sitting at our precincts once or twice, and they really just sat there. Although at one point their credentials had political slogans on them, which is illegal, right? They can't have,
Right.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So
who credentials them, Rena?
their organization. So like the political party, or, we had in Washtenaw County, the NAACP was approved to put challengers in the polls, and the county clerk distributed a picture of what their credentials would look like. And they just wear them around. They wear them around their neck, like in a plastic
Sleeve,
name badgie type thing.
Right. Okay. So there are a lot of threats about, specifically about Republican poll challengers coming in droves. Are we really worried about this? What is your professional take on that threat?
I'll yield to Diana.
I don't know. I know that there are some people who are concerned about that. I don't know how broad that concern is. I've just not heard much about it. Are you getting any kind of intelligence or warnings about that from your end, Rena?
I haven't really heard anything like that. We'll know soon enough if they start actually credentialing people. I wouldn't expect, I don't know. I would expect it in Detroit and Flint, not in Washtenaw County, but I don't know. Michigan is always very suspicious of, rural Michigan is very suspicious of urban Michigan. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, you know what? You were muted there for a minute. I didn't hear you. Did you hear, Diana?
Yes, and Rena was just pointing out that rural Michigan sometimes is suspicious of urban Michigan, and there's some concern that there may be challenges in urban areas, is I guess what the implication is there.
Okay.
what Rena actually said.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I didn't, you were muted from my own setup here. Is the ACLU going to do voter education on how to correctly complete the ballot? For example, no check marks, but completely darken the box, etc.
I don't think that there's, that's not been something that, for example, at the Speakers Bureau that we've been focusing on. There is certainly at the hotline, if anybody calls up and has any questions, the people there are trained to walk you through every step of the process. But we aren't, that particular level of detail is not something that we've been really talking about, trying to reinforce for people. I think most voters understand that part of the instructions, but maybe not.
Okay. A question about police at the polls. Are police allowed to come in and just walk around or stand around?
Again, I would yield to any lawyers on the call, but I think they can. They're a citizen, and they can go in the they can sit there in the public area. Yeah. I would call that intimidation, but they were probably allowed to do it. Can't imagine they'd be allowed to do it while on duty.
Right, that's the thing. Like, I'm not on duty. I'm not sure where that question exactly is coming from. I had put a question in the chat earlier too about, it's hard to know how much is rumor and how much is true. I had heard that some of the Russian engagement in this election involved penetrating some systems to erase registration records so that a voter who's been registered for 30 years could go to the poll and find she wasn't registered. I just wanted to bring that up and point out that at least in Michigan, you can just check your registration 30 times a day at mi.gov/vote, and just check it before you go to the polls and just make sure that you're registered. It's so easy.
I do have one thing to add, that the Secretary of State literally just rolled out multi-factor authentication, and we have, for everybody on your staff. So we have to do the multi-factor authentication every time we log into the QVF. That's going to add a heightened level of security to our voter registration files.
Yeah, that's great. I do have another question. That is do we have the best Secretary of State in the country, or just one of the top 3?
The best.
She's amazing. Here's a question in chat also from Cindy. Livingston County had a great number of invalid ballots, absentee ballots, up 10%. Is this highly unusual? Let me see. Invalid votes. Is that because it was a primary and people crossed parties? I guess let's just get to the question of Livingston County had a great number of invalid absentee ballots, up to 10%. I've heard numbers up of like 8 to 10% as well.
The statistics I've seen for rejected absentee ballots, overwhelmingly the biggest problem is timeliness, just not arriving by 8 o'clock on the election day. Signatures have been some problem, and there's a smattering of other kinds of problems that have caused some rejection. I think I don't know how those numbers compare with past years in terms of percentages. The numbers are certainly higher because the absentee voting is higher. I think that the number of, I'm just looking at the statistics that I was given. I don't have them here. A huge number of absentee ballots were cast in the primary, and they're expecting even more, something like 65% of ballots. Some people are predicting are going to be voted absentee. So there is going to be a larger number of ballots, absentee ballots rejected, just because the numbers in general are so high. Rena, I don't know if you know anything more about the percentages.
Sorry, I was muted again. I do not. I haven't actually seen those numbers, but I agree. I think when we first mentioned that in a primary, a lot of ballots, where people cross parties and do other things that make their ballot get, the tabulator won't accept it. And
Right.
so if you have high numbers of new voters, high numbers of absentee ballots, when the person's not there to make a correction if they've made a mistake. And so you're going to have a greater number of those invalid ballots.
Okay.
It's confusing. People didn't even really understand what a primary was.
Yeah. No, yeah, right. I mean, I wonder if most people don't understand what a primary is. We had huge turnout in Washtenaw County, and it was 36% of registered voters who turned out for the primary, and that was unprecedented. So yeah, most people don't really understand what a primary is. Susan says, ask Rena about Dropbox delivery of ballots, but I'm not sure what the full question is there. So I can't, unless Susan wants to expand on that, I don't know how to ask that question. Anything else from anybody? Just some anxiety.
Yeah, I do want to say that Rena's point is well taken about the walk in and expect them to drop everything and issue your absentee ballot to you while you're there, and how the administrative problems that may cause. That's a really good point, and it's not
It is
something
really good to know.
I think that we've heard from other clerks yet. So I'm definitely going to pass that on up the line. As far as the other points of concern, I think that we are still encouraging people, if they are at all uncomfortable with voting in person, rather than stay home, cast an absentee ballot. It is a safe process. There's a paper trail. There's easy ways to do it with drop boxes or mail-in ballots. And despite all of the horror stories about how bad things are going to be, even if it takes some time to verify and count those ballots, and even though the absentee ballots do create more work for the clerk than in-person voting, it is still a valid and safe way to vote. And if that's what is going to get people to the polls, we're still really encouraging people to do it.
Absolutely.
I have
All
a
right.
question.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I have a question,
Hey, Edie.
just real quick. Well, I don't know if it's quick, but if there is a sort of a thing where they try to call the election based on the non-absentee balloting, does ACLU have a plan for how to defend against essentially them calling the election for Trump and for what's his face that's running against Peters?
Yeah.
I really worry about that.
I don't know. I know that there are a lot of people within the ACLU who are working on just about every possible contingency they can think of. Whether that's one of them or not, I don't know, but there certainly is a lot of work being done trying to anticipate what problems may arise and be ready to try and address those. Whether that means dispatching people on election day or litigation after the polls close, they're looking at all options.
Thanks.
That's a good question, Edie. I know that a lot of, I mean, I'm sorry, the President of the United States has already said that he's going to do that. So I'm sure that there's a great deal going on to head off that insistence really that absentee votes don't count because they take longer to count. So I know that there's a great deal going on to forestall that outcome.
I would literally, this is Rena chiming in again because I can't help myself.
Good.
Look to the City of Ann Arbor's absent voter counting board in August was amazing. And so there are clerks out there that know how to make this happen. They were done early. I mean, they had trained staff. I can't even remember. I did their math. I was like, wow, their people move faster than my people. So I react to that by going, okay, I need more people, right? If I have more pairs counting, and I know, for example, in Ypsilanti Township, the clerk is super worried about having extra tabulators. So people are lining up extra tabulators in advance because they know that the onslaught is coming. Yeah. So I hope that we are able to plan ahead so that we are not counting absentee ballots into the wee hours.
I have also recently learned that political experts believe that we will know the outcome of Florida on election night because Florida is allowed to count absentee ballots as
Teresa, you're frozen.
We lost Teresa.
I think we lost Teresa. Yeah.
the vote. Some of the states are going to get their votes counted very quickly because they can count them in advance.
And I believe that there's some bills that were introduced into the Michigan legislature to allow that, including one that would at least allow the clerks to open the envelopes and compare signatures, even if they can't actually count the ballots a day before Election Day. I heard that that was going to be voted on this week, but I don't know where that stands.
The Senate passed it overwhelmingly. Yeah.
Okay.
Now it just goes to the House, right?
But it's pretty watered down. I mean, you know, it's like a day in advance and not
a day in advance.
You know, and they still haven't decided on whether or not to allow people to do the the absentee ballot in shifts, which would be a huge thing.
Right.
Now, Rita, can you outline that? That was another question that had come up. As far as poll worker shifts and the absentee counting board shifts. The rule, as I understand it, is for poll workers that they have to work the entire day from 7 in the morning till 8 at night, and they cannot work in shifts right now unless that's changed. Is that correct?
Correct. So for the AV counting board, there is a shift. There's a new thing, but it's awful. It's basically just a graveyard shift. So the way the law has been is that, yeah, you couldn't leave until you were done, basically. The people do that in the polls, not exactly. I mean, some communities had shifts, but you need at least some people who were there at opening to also be there at closing. But you can allow some people to work a half a day, or, you know, a lunch lady type situation where you had somebody come in to give other people a break. But that's not the case in the absent voter counting boards. They are sequestered and they have to stay there until they're done. The new rule, and I'm not sure if it's a law or just a rule, but it allows the people that open and do the let's call it the first shift, they can leave after 8 p.m. So after polls close, and you can have a second shift come in at 8 p.m. and work through the night. And then I believe if you're still not done, you're allowed to have another shift start at 6 a.m. the following day. So you're allowed to have a graveyard shift and then a second day shift. But it still doesn't get around. I mean, and I honestly haven't read the language yet. I know the opening the envelopes early is only for municipalities above, I think it's 40,000 registered voters. So I'm not sure if the new shift laws apply to every municipality or just the big ones.
Okay.
But it's pretty problematic. I mean, I'm still thinking that most people are going to try to get the AVs counted with the same team and just get them done. So maybe they'll have a contingent on hold for the graveyard shift if the first shift doesn't get it done.
Okay. Susan's question about drop boxes. I hope you're not still talking and I can't hear you. Susan's question about drop boxes is whether or not you think they're a good idea. Rena.
Oh, love drop boxes. Love them. They've saved our butt during COVID, just in many ways.
Right.
Just allowing people to drop materials and not have to, come into buildings.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
The only problem with drop boxes is again, voter education. We had people putting ballots for different municipalities in, they just put it in the drop box as closest to their house, not realizing that it's, not where they vote.
If that happens, are you able to move it to the correct location?
Yeah, but it was terrible at 7:35 that the city of Ann Arbor voters were still dropping their things. I literally put tape across our drop box and said, come inside, because we couldn't. But I have a good post office story. A post office employee dropped some things off after 7 o'clock at our office, and I had a stack of city of Ann Arbor ballots, and I was looking for someone to run them down to the city, and the post office employee said he would do it.
That's nice.
So there's a good story. But yeah, so the drop boxes are great, except for that that problem that people think they put it in a drop box before 8 p.m. and then the county in Washtenaw County had one of the deputy clerks literally running ballots around all day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's an important point for people to know, is that there's legal limits on who's allowed to deliver or mail absentee ballots or absentee ballot applications. And applications, it's a little bit more broader, but with absentee ballots, you can only have it mailed or delivered by the voter, a member of their immediate family, someone in their household, or the clerk or one of the clerk's deputies, or an authorized mail carrier. So you can't just say to your next door neighbor, hey, can you run this down to somewhere for me? It's much more restrictive than that.
Right. All right, we have reached our time, and I just want to say thank you, Rena. I'm so glad you were here. Thank you, Diana. What a fantastic team. I think yeah, right, Edie. Thanks. Everybody clap for the fantastic team here. And the League of Women Voters Tech Team, Nancy Brucken, Susan Woolley, and Shelley Shanfield. Thank you so much for your help. And what else did I want to say? Oh, so our next program is on the First Amendment, and problems with the First Amendment, challenges involved in the First Amendment as we practice it and observe it. That's going to be, our guest that night will be Professor Leonard Niehoff of the University of Michigan Law School. So he's an internationally known expert in our First Amendment law. So that'll be fascinating. That's October 21st. Put it on your calendars. It's going to be really, really fascinating. And once more, I want to say that although we have mentioned political parties, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan voter education organization, and nothing said here tonight should be construed as partisan. So the names have been named, but we're a nonpartisan political voter education organization.
And I did want to say one other thing, which is that we are looking for feedback from people as to whether this kind of presentation is helpful, and what sorts of things you think we could spend more or less time on. So please send an email, maybe if one of you can.
What is our email address, you guys? lwvannarbor.org. Oh, no, that's
No, it's league@lwvannarbor.org.
league at,
@lwvannarbor.org.
okay.
Are the slides,
Yeah.
sorry, are the slides that were shown available?
Well, if this was recorded and on YouTube, then yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we will be putting the, we'll edit the recording and we'll mount it on YouTube. And you can also view it on our Facebook page as well in our videos.
Okay.
Again,
I'm sorry that
sorry,
I'm sorry
Diana.
that I couldn't see the slides. This is Rena. I'm sorry that I couldn't see all your lovely faces and that I couldn't see the slides, but I do want to compliment Diana on the material. It was really outstanding, very, very accurate. There's so many people give presentations and they miss some of the details. So thank you again for providing such accurate information.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Have a good night and keep
Good
breathing
night.
deeply.
Miss you, Teresa.
Longer
Miss you,
exhales than
everybody.
inhales. Good night.